Hello, and welcome back to Meet Bridget, a show that sheds light on the often untold teenage and young adult stories of successful women from all types of backgrounds and in all sorts of careers. This show is an extension of our confidence coaching service for young women. I'm Asha Gabriel, and I co host this show alongside my best friend and Meet Bridget COO, Kashia Rosenberg. This is season 4 of Meet Bridget, and today we are so excited for you to meet Stephanie Clymer, owner of Orange County's cult favorite boutiques shop, Common Thread. If you are local to Orange County, specifically Newport Beach and Costa Mesa, I'm positive you've heard of these boutiques because they are in a league of their own. You walk in, you're instantly greeted by just a different kind of shop girl. And I say that because they refer to themselves as the shop girls. It's so personalized and warm and friendly and really a different kind of retail experience. So I'm so excited to have Stephanie on and to dive in a little bit into her teen years. To give you a little bit more background about Stephanie, she started her entrepreneurial career at 25 years old with her first boutique in Costa Mesa, California. The year was 2006, and after surviving the 2008 financial crisis, Steph and her tiny team grew slowly for a full decade before unlocking the secret to building a $1 million business that quickly turned into a $5 million brand. Often called the queen of the pivot, Steph is known for trusting her gut and seeing the next shift that will create momentum and guarantee growth. And if you're ready for the best news, in her opinion, she cultivated this skill in her late 30s, proving that it's never too late to create your own pivot. So, Steph, thank you for your time. I'm so excited to have you here and just get into your story.
Oh, thank you, Asha. What an intro. It's always interesting to hear about yourself on the other side.
I love that. Well, there's a lot to talk about and a lot of success. I personally, if anyone's listened to my episode, I've been through a lot of pivots too. So I love the magic that happens in a pivot. When you're in the middle of it, it feels so rocky, but then you look back and I think the navigating those turns and twists and taking the feedback that life gives you really develops, we're obviously obsessed with confidence, but I think that there are a few things in life that create more confident than successfully navigating a pivot. So,
I loved your episode because I related so much. It's like it's okay to shift and change. And sometimes, I don't know about you, but when I was younger, I had a moment of worrying if that was okay. Is that flaky? Is that not committed? And no, it's just you're learning this time of your life to take you to the next step. So, and I mean, you went through so many amazing
a
journeys.
lot of different journeys, and I think that I felt that pressure, and it's a big motivation for what we're creating here with the podcast is sort of this relatable career library, but also through our coaching, is there's so much pressure, especially today with social media and all these pressures to brand yourself and put yourself out there and, create your page and your TikTok and all this stuff. It really
My gosh.
forces people to try to kind of label themselves and make their aesthetic and all this stuff, but it
It does.
doesn't leave a lot of wiggle room for change once it's all out there on the internet. So I'm definitely a big believer that it's like you have one life, you might as well figure out what you like and what you don't like and toss the stuff you don't like. Keep moving towards the light. So yeah, I will get off my soapbox, but I'm so excited to hear a little bit about your childhood to start. Where were you born? What was your family life like growing up?
Oh, I love this part because you didn't even ask any of these questions. So it's like a true, for all we know about each other, I feel like this is an area where we've never gone. I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, actually. And my parents were divorced when I was really young. My mom and dad, they only had me. My mom got remarried also when I was really young, but I had a stepsister. She was she's 9 years older than me.
Wow.
So in a lot of ways, childhood wise, I really grew up, I think in a lot of ways like an only child
Mhm.
because she was a teenager ready to leave the house almost by the time we were introduced into each other's lives. So that I feel like probably shaped me in a lot of ways. I stayed in Tucson, Arizona. I went to high school, I went to college, and I couldn't get out fast enough. I don't know about anybody else who ever is just Tucson's not small, it's not big, if that makes sense. I don't think it's where you say, "Oh, I was born in this little small town," but it was definitely a college town. It was not a major city by any means, and by the time I finished college, I was ready for something new.
I can totally relate to that. So I grew up in Redding, California, which I would always kind of
Yeah.
lovingly joke was a suburb of nowhere. It just was like, it's not small. Like there's all this stuff up here, but I just felt my biggest criteria for where I was looking for colleges was like big school, big sports, people from around the world. That's what I wanted. So I can totally relate to that feeling.
You know how we want what we don't have because right, the grass seems greener,
Mhm.
especially when you're young. First, I wanted siblings, of course, and then I wanted a big city. I wanted a pro sports team. I don't even know that I knew what I wanted. I just felt like everybody else must have more. Everywhere else you live must have more. And I mean, that's not always true. It's perspective though, for sure.
I'm so interested in hearing a little bit, if you're comfortable, about just navigating your parents having a divorce when you were young. Would you mind kind of talking us through your understanding of it at the age that you were at and how you might think that has affected you moving forward?
So to be really honest, I was so young, I think maybe 3, that
Mhm.
I don't so maybe it's a
Yeah.
blessing in a way. I don't truly have very many memories. If anyone can take yourself back to like, well, have these little memories, I think. And I know some people have really in detail memories when they're super young, but I don't. So I'll have little moments of like where you stand in a hallway and you remember how something looked. But overall, I don't feel like I had to go to the space of remembering what it was like when we all had dinner together or vacation together or
Yeah.
things like that. It's more from photos. So why I say that's maybe a blessing is it wasn't like I grew up missing something
Right.
that no longer was because I didn't remember that. What I will say is my mom was remarried a second time for 17 years and it was tough. It was tumultuous. Him and I, my stepfather and I had a really complicated relationship. Sometimes we tried to be close, but overall, I would say we were just like this. My dad and I weren't super close. So, I felt like I grew up and I'm strong and I'm fine and I have my mom. But as I got married and had my own children, we have to be honest, everything shapes who we are and affects who we are and how we are. What's really showing me that is my oldest is 13, but it's a boy because I told you if I had a girl, she would be in your coaching program, no doubt, because I can look back. I didn't have a great father figure. That affects your confidence 100%. And I think as a female or a male,
Hmm.
and so I look back at my junior high years and I was not confident. I was not a leader. I was not always making the best choices. And now I have a son going into seventh grade. And I really wanted to put that on him, right? As a parent, our kids going into junior high. And I'm like, oh boy, this is when all the opportunities come to make the wrong choices. And I had to really go, but his life isn't my life. And so that's where I started to see. And so honestly, at 43, and it was the first time really in the past couple years where I've been like, oh, I really need to admit that my childhood probably did have some effect on my decision making process, my confidence, and we can't put that on our own children. We can just try to do better,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and that's really it.
I mean, from the sense that I get about you, you seem like the kind of person that is always interested in self betterment, coaching. Like you seem like a therapy kind of person. You just seem like you're a person that likes to do work on yourself and constantly be improving yourself. For a young person, girl or boy, that might be going through a situation like yours, where maybe there was a mother or father figure that's not so present, is there any light that you could shed on that now, having kind of worked through it a little bit? You know, it's one thing to accept that it, like, okay, this has affected me in some ways. How have you kind of like incorporated that in a productive way for yourself?
Okay, well, first of all, I became obsessed with growth when I found it in my late 30s. I wish that there were podcasts and books and things like we have now when I was younger. Maybe it didn't exist. Maybe I just didn't know how to access it. I mean, probably a little bit of both, to be honest. I mean, clearly we didn't have social media or podcasts like we have now. Coaching was introduced to me in my late 30s, which I'll get to in a bit. But what I will say is, so much of it, and I always had this mindset, and this I don't know how, this is like a blessing, maybe it's faith, a lot of it was probably watching my mom. I never felt sorry for myself or thought about what I didn't have. So while yes, those relationships, and if I really dive in, of course, we're affected by every single thing, right? And nobody has a life without some challenge or some hurt or something will happen to all of us. But I just remember thinking, I can't believe I have this mom who is so amazing. I can't believe our relationship that we have. I remember saying things like, "Oh, she makes up for any father figure I don't have." And I don't know that that was really true or the right way to say it, but when I look back, I go, I was already just focusing on what I have, not what I didn't have. So if you can look at, even in the most challenging situation, is there a mentor that stepped into your life that wouldn't have, or an aunt or an uncle or a friend's parent? Like, I know it's not maybe how we would have chosen it, but if we can kind of shift that, like this challenge brought this,
Right.
I think that I was just lucky that I had that mindset. And I will tell you, I wasn't aware of it. It wasn't on purpose. I wasn't doing the work for it, but it can really save us from that kind of victim mentality that can come in where you're only focusing on what you're lacking. So I will say in any situation you're in, and I'm not trying to say that it's not hard because especially the younger we are, we can feel so alone
Mhm.
and it's so easy to go, well, like they have this, or just like I want that. I mean, I remember friends with really awesome dads thinking, I'm going to marry a man who's that kind of dad because that's the part I could control. The other part I couldn't. It already happened. So I would just say if there's a way to get help, or if you are in a coaching or a therapy situation, if somebody can kind of help you develop that type of outlook, go so far.
Totally.
So, so far. And the therapy person, Asha, I wasn't. I went to therapy for my first time this year and I was like, this is the best thing ever.
Amen.
I went to find a I went to
Yeah,
find
girl.
a therapist for my son and I was like, "Can I come back? I
Yes.
love you. This
Yes.
is what have I been waiting for?" So,
It's
go. Don't
totally.
I wish everybody talked about it. I wish everybody had a coach or a therapist or a mentor or somebody for literally everything,
Yes.
right? We go for lifting weights, like that's, the thing that probably matters less than our
Totally.
mind.
Totally. I think about therapy like going to the gym. It's like mental health workout. I like started seeing a therapist when I was going through my thyroid cancer and then kind of fell off a little
Yeah.
bit and went again after I had postpartum hemorrhaging with my first daughter. And after I went back, I just keep going. And sometimes there's sessions where it's like, I'm like, I don't really, I'm not really bugged about anything. Like, I feel like I'm doing pretty good. But those I feel like are the most interesting sessions because something will kind of pop up or we'll have time to kind of like, go into parts of my mindset that I just hadn't really even acknowledged. I just think it's all positive and we really try to like normalize it for every age and every stage. So, I love that. Well, you
100%.
you struck me as someone that's been going to therapy for a while, so maybe you've just
I
doing that.
I think I was doing, like, self-therapy and
Yeah,
not knowing it, and
yeah.
I do, it's a funny story, so I was not in therapy, and this whole coaching concept, I don't know if you can take yourself back. I remember when Match.com became a thing, and I was young and single, and it was brand new, and my boss at the time was one of my closest girlfriends, and she was 5 years older, and she suggested I go on this, and I'm like, "You're insane." Like, it had this negative connotation, right? It wasn't normal yet. That's how I feel about life coaching when I was introduced. I
Mhm.
was like, "I will never have a life coach." And 2 months later, I was, like, signed on the dotted line. Everything changed, mindset, business, all of it. So, I would just say keep an open mind, and I'm so glad that things are more, I don't wanna say normalized or mainstream, or we're all talking about it, and I use that dating example because if you're young now, you're like, "What do you mean it was weird?" Right? It's
Yeah,
so normal,
yeah.
but I'm old enough that I was dating when it was like, "No way," because
Totally.
it was new and people weren't talking about it yet, and that's how I felt about life coaching. I was like, "A life coach?" And I even said to her, the woman I hired, "You're gonna be my business coach. We're just gonna call you that until I can get past this."
Yeah. You're right, 'cause I'm okay with, like, having someone to help with my business, but, like, yeah, I think that there's such a good nugget of advice in there about anything that kind of feels new or like, "Oh, I shouldn't need to lean on someone else for that kind of help or community," or like, "I shouldn't need support there." If you have that feeling about any opportunity that comes up that might seem helpful, just take note because it's probably something to lean into. Cough, our coaching cough. So,
Yes.
but
Well, I
yeah.
mean, what I would have loved, right? Okay, so at the age of the women that you coach, to have a woman who I hopefully look up to, who's been through it, who made the mistakes, who it wasn't always perfect, who maybe I could even admit something I'm going through that, when we're young, we can't tell our mom everything and we can't tell our friends everything. And a teacher, like, there's just not always the right person in our corner, whether it be a therapist or a coach, where it's like, I'm really messing up right now, or I'm making these decisions, or I'm going down this road. And it's really hard when you're
Yeah,
young, right? Because who do you tell? Who
exactly.
do you bounce these ideas off of? And that's why I was so excited to come on here, because I think we meet somebody at a certain phase and a certain age, and we make up a story. Like, they always had their life together, or they never made a wrong decision, or they were a goody goody, or this or that. And then we start to judge ourselves based on that. But we have no idea who somebody was in high school, college. I mean, I will be the first to tell you, I don't think I was even recognizable to the person I am now. So wherever anybody is, I hope they find somebody ahead of them willing to be vulnerable.
Tot
Don't find the person with the perfect life who's going to tell you they never made those bad decisions, because you don't really need that. That's
Yeah.
not helpful, and it just causes you to judge yourself even more.
Well, and I think that social media isn't all bad. There are so many fabulous things about social media in terms of connecting us to resources and businesses and all sorts of things. But I think that there is this temptation to look for that person online. And it's like, you don't, even if you're following someone and they're sharing what seems like every detail of their lives and their products and all these things, you don't have that real connection with someone, unless it's some sort of one to one or real interaction that's goes both ways. I've been just living with this quote lately. I can't remember who said it, but it's like, if you really want to learn something, try teaching it. And Kashia and I have learned so much about vulnerability and like not having to have things be perfect to have them be useful. And that's really just been the theme of our coaching. It's like we've had the most powerful moments in our workshops and different events and things when we kind of slip up a little bit or things go a different way than we thought they might, or we have to be just frank and honest and share something. I think one of our biggest events that we did with Microsoft, it was like this partnered branded event. It was planned for months. And then I got my thyroid cancer diagnosis and we had to sit down. We're like, are we going to cancel it? And I was like, nope. Nope, like, it's gonna happen, I need this. And we just pulled it together, and it ended up being, like, better than we could have ever imagined, and I remember, like, standing up in front of those girls, and I'm like, part of me is like, "I don't need to, like, burden these teenagers with, like, the cancer word," but then I was also like, "These are teenagers equipped with the internet and cell phones, they have access to all sorts of things that are scarier and more dangerous than a real human going through cancer." So I shared it with them, and it was such a vulnerable and wonderful weekend, and we're just trying to have more of that out there, you know?
Well, and I'm just picturing being a young woman sitting in my chair looking at you, right? She's tall, she's beautiful, she's newly engaged. And had you not shared that, it's like she has a career, plus she's starting this own platform. And suddenly, I think my favorite thing to say to myself is, what story are you telling yourself, right? And suddenly, as a young girl sitting there looking at you, I would be telling this story of your life as a fairy tale. And maybe you don't know what it's like. And so that's why, I like to tell the story of, I didn't grow up in a picture perfect home and family. It was not traditional. It wasn't always peaceful. I mean, that's something I work really hard on in my own family.
Mhm,
I, through therapy,
mm,
discovered that that's why I love control and perfectionism. And, I remember coming home and explaining it to my husband and being like, I expect you to be perfect and the kids to be perfect. And he was like, oh, thank God, like, when do we send you back to this therapist? Because we bring these things in from something that's happened to us, right? So you wanting to stand up there and be perfect, or me wanting to, I have it all together and thinking that that's why people would maybe come to my business and shop at my business. The older I get, it's like people like the messy, right? They like the real and the authenticity, but then there's this new pressure, and I don't know if you feel this, because it's like, but you don't wanna be a whiner, and you don't wanna be a complainer, and you don't wanna be a victim, and so how are you honest without that? And I just can't even imagine being 16 and trying to navigate this. Like,
totally.
I will joke and say, "I wish I had these resources," but you know what? This day and age, teens need these resources probably more so than we ever did, because they're navigating a world and pressures, and things are just speeding up in a way that we didn't have that. So while we didn't have all the podcasts and all the advice, we also didn't have, something where if you put it out there, it's there forever.
Yeah.
I mean, trying to teach our kids that, I think it's one of the things that scares my husband and I the most, and feel like he's always sharing stories of like, this will look what happened to these kids and this will never leave them, when they want to apply for college. And I mean, the pressure of not being able to mess up publicly like that
Yeah.
it's intense.
Yeah. Well, and I'm listening to you and also hearing there's so much pressure on our young people, but there's also so much pressure on the
Mhm.
parents. And it's like even the most mindful, positive, patient, amazing parents are going to have a hard time parenting kids in this era, and that's where I think we, in our motivation to really continue to build this platform, it's been that like even the best parents, like they need a third party to kinda help with
Mhm.
some of this stuff, and it's not a reflection of the parenting because the best mom, the best dad sitting down with their kid, it's just we need more resources, like, we send children to school to learn, academics, we send them to sports to move their bodies, and we're just trying to build something where we can send them to take care of their minds and not feel isolated because I think that isolation that you were talking about and that it sounds like you felt, when you were going through those younger years with your, the stepdad you weren't really connecting to, the stepsister that was much older than you, the isolation is just it's just where things get so sticky, and it's always an illusion from what I've
Yes,
learned. Like,
it
no matter
is.
what you're
So,
going through, there is someone else going through it out there in the world, and I think that that itself is a very empowering realization.
and how we see people, right? And how they see themselves. I mean, we know this as adults.
Mhm.
And, the older you get, the more it's like what's on the inside versus the outside. But I do think when you're young, it's so much the external and wanting to
Yes.
fit in. I was like, what is my best teenage story about not living authentically to myself?
Mhm.
And let me just tell you, I don't think I was like the popular girl. I don't even know what crowd I was in. I mean, I ran cross country and maybe that was probably like the dorkiest sport in my school. I don't know, but I was like not a dork, but not cool. I went to a Catholic high school. So I think that it wasn't as segregated, but I have always been insanely type A. I mean, it's who I am, it's how I am. And I can remember, I tell this story to my husband and he just thinks it's the funniest thing he's ever heard. Let's say you get an assignment and it's due in 2 weeks. I mean, mine was done by that first weekend, laminated, put away, but
Amazing.
I was so insecure that, the night before it's due, how everyone's sitting around the lunch table or after school and it's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm gonna be up all night and I'm gonna be doing this paper," because I would pretend that that was me too. I mean, how insecure do you have to be? I would be like, "I know. I know. It's gonna take until," and I'm like, in my actual mind, it's like, "Who can live this way? I could never do that." But it's such a silly story, but I think back to it and my heart kind of breaks for that girl because I think you didn't feel like people would just like you for who you were. And that's what I never want my kids to feel. That's what I never want these women who come to you girls to feel like, and whether you're the girl who waits till the last minute or the girl who does it earlier in the middle, to think that that should matter or be why somebody would like you more or less is just, it was like the one story I could think of that really just made me go, wow, Steph, you were more insecure than you knew.
It's so relatable, and I love that story because in so many cases and really the reason that we've even launched into coaching was that most of the most successful women, once they leaned into the thing that made them different or that they felt they wanted to hide when they were in those teen years, that different thing is what actually is the foundation for their success. And I'm thinking of you with your organization and your lamination and just being ahead of something and also thinking how that must be so essential to the type of business that you run very well, like a tight ship, and it's just beautiful and thoughtful, that is a foundation for your success now, but it's like to think back, there's just the pressure to be the same and not stick out for anything or like, oh, this thing is different about me. I better kind of like, back off it a little bit because I don't want it to what, and it's funny because like we never really I feel like as teenagers we never really get to that the answer to like, well, what
To
will
what
happen?
would anybody have cared?
No,
Like, would
no one
anybody
cares.
have cared? It's so silly we hide who we are, but that was such a aha moment for
Mhm.
me. I love that the women are gonna think that, like, find what sets you apart and then go there, because now, and I'm sure you can relate in business, when things aren't going well, all I'm thinking of is what else can we do to set us apart?
Mhm.
How can we take a shopping experience and make it different? So it's so interesting because you go from just wanting to blend and fit in. And you're right. If you really paid attention, everybody you looked up to, everybody who's done anything in this world did the opposite of blending and fitting in because otherwise you're just another one of many. And that's a little bit boring. That's not going to create a story or a book or a business.
And it doesn't have to be also because there's a there's so much pressure on our young women to do a million things, but then it's also, like, they get to the point of, like, writing your college applications and stuff, and so many young people, like, just struggle with, like, "I don't have anything special about me." Even people I mean, I
Yeah.
coach girls in inner city LA that had raised all their siblings, and they're like, "I got nothing to write about." And it's like, "Well, tell me a little bit about, like, your life," and it's like, "You have a bazillion things to write about, first of all, but you haven't acknowledged any of these things that kinda set you apart," and it's not asking for like, you don't wouldn't have needed to, like, stand on your desk and say, "Look, everybody, I finished this early," but to just have that quiet knowing that, like, "Huh, like, it looks like a lot of people around me are doing it one way, and, like, this is kinda neat, like, my system's working for me," and just knowing that for yourself and being okay with it without having to like, make it your thing or, like, hang your hat on it and be like, "This is gonna be who I am, and, you know, everyone has to know me by this." It's like, just taking note of those things and having that self-awareness. I think when we all get to that adulthood point later on where people are like, "Okay, well, what's different about you?" "Why do you stand out for this job? Why should you go to this college? Why should we invest in your business?" Once you've had that inventory kinda going for a lot longer, you have so much at your disposal to lean on.
You know what I think of now? What I think of that story is, had I been smarter or I guess more confident to take, I would have created a system and you could have taught everybody how to do it. That's a
Totally,
business, like the
totally.
entrepreneurial mind of me goes exactly like you said. Huh. Am I the only one who can figure out how to do a little bit each night and never have to feel like this again? I mean,
Yes.
that's the thing, and that's I do think our young people are thinking like that
Mhm.
now, and they're learning to think like this now, and schools are talking about this, and that just fires me up because the ideas and businesses and the just the things that I think are coming in our future with this generation, I think it's gonna blow our mind, and I
Like
do believe it's the positive to come out of,
mhm.
you know, maybe a time where we were all kind of feeling lost and confused and alone and not talking about therapy and not talking about coaching is like what fires me up is that this younger generation has just ideas and they're tapping into them because we're encouraging them to do that.
Yes. Yes, and that, like, fast iteration, experimenting until you can kind of, like, get to the right version of something. I just think that it's so much easier to try things now too.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to work.
No.
It's so much less scary. I think that when I was young, I thought it just was not. I would have told you that if I thought I was gonna fail, I wouldn't do it. Or if I wasn't sure I would succeed, I wouldn't do it. Why I started my business, I just say I was too young and dumb to think that it might not work. Like, I really just felt like it would work. I know that if I thought this might not work, where I was at 25, I would have been like, "Don't do it. Don't do it. Everybody will know. There's, the ego involved, the embarrassment involved, that I can't fail." And that's so not true. You're gonna fail more than you don't, but there's always like I have so many business ideas within my business right now that don't work all the time, all the time. If it was that easy to never, you know, hit it wrong, everybody would be doing it.
Totally. And well, it's like most of the time when people are able to get something right, either they got very lucky, or it's the one thing that they just stuck with for an insanely long time until it worked, or they did enough things wrong and took note of that and learned from it that they happened to land on something right. So it's like in any of those scenarios, people are doing, and not sitting in the self-doubt and the
Yeah.
hesitation and, like, stopping themselves before anyone says no for them. Stay in your, like, childhood, early teens for a little bit. You're in fashion and retail now. Did you have an interest in that when you were younger, or was it something that kinda developed later?
Yes, I did. I always loved clothing, getting dressed. I was like laying my outfits out. I was really curious about styles and fashion, but I didn't honestly I didn't hear the right question to think, what do you love? Turn it into a career.
Mhm.
So I go to college, and I recently told this story to somebody. If you're our age or my age, you just had Oprah. We didn't have podcasts, and we didn't have TED Talks, and we didn't have social media. So we watched Oprah, most of us. And I went to college, and I was a journalism major. I mean, I was probably really vain. I was going to be on TV. I didn't think through more than that. And I'm sitting in the class my freshman year. And thankfully, I had this awesome professor who was like walking you through what it's like when a family has just had a tragedy and you're shoving a microphone in their face. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not what I want to do with my life. And I'm watching Oprah, and she talks about figure out what you love and then back it up. This is such a simple concept. And I know we're talking about this everywhere, now. But again, I'm 43.
Yep.
I was 18. It was the first time. I don't know what it was. I don't know why I was paying so much attention sitting in my dorm room. So I went out and I got a job at a boutique. I thought I'll just start there. And that was my college job. And I always worked at boutiques. And that's where I was lucky because I always worked directly for the owner. I opened the place, I closed the place. They showed me how they bought things. They would go to market and teach me about it. So that was the beauty of the small, because it's not like I was at, you know, I guess this is the beauty of growing up in Tucson.
Mhm.
See, here's another
There you
silver
go.
lining. There wasn't a Nordstrom's down the street. We didn't have a Bloomingdale's, like the really great department stores that we wanted to shop at.
Mhm.
We didn't have those. So I worked at these little boutiques, two of them to be specific, and I learned a lot. But I wanted to get out of, Arizona, so I moved. I got a job in public relations at Neiman Marcus. So there I gained some more experience at a big company. And when I wanted to, a few years later, I kind of bounced. And so now I was in another job where I wasn't happy. The only thing I could think that I really wanted to do was own my own boutique. I loved that in college. So much so that I became a retail major because it was like the buying and numbers and a lot of math and spreadsheets. And, I mean, college can and is so important for so many reasons, but everything I actually learned about the numbers then is obsolete. And that's the one like thing I think we have to keep in mind is broader picture. What are we learning depending on what you're going to do or be, right? So I'm more learning concepts and thinking broad. And so that was it. That was where I figured out I will own a boutique one day. And so I did. And I do.
Yeah, I think that's such a, good point about college too, because I feel like there's also this like counter push where it's like, oh, like I could be an influencer, I could do this. There's internet companies, like I don't need college at all. And some people don't, depending on what you're doing, there's a lot of ways to find success. But I also think that there is, for some careers, it's like, yes, you're learning very like, applied engineering skills and stuff where it's like, okay, you're very much going to use coding in this software in your job or whatever, but for a lot of the more kind of, business careers, more creative careers, I think there still is value in college, but it's more like, can I live on my own? Like, can I create meaningful relationships with other people? Like, can I navigate a city? Can I organize my academic life and my social life? There's all these other kind of things going on. And you could recreate that in another way, moving to a city by yourself or something. But you know that there are a lot of soft skills to be learned during college. Even just the experience that you had where you're like, oh, wait, like I thought I wanted to be in journalism. And like, this actually doesn't sound like me at all, you know?
There's not always one right, one wrong answer. I mean, let's say I had stayed a journalism major, but decided to work in boutiques. That could still have been the right path. It's
Yes.
not always like to your point, it was learning to live on my own, to have a budget, to time manage work and school. I mean, that's how I was able to time manage a full-time job and writing a business plan and getting an SBA loan and starting my business on the side while working. I mean, that is a skill that I learned.
Totally.
So I think we take whatever it is. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't always think you can go wrong. Again, if you're in one of those more generalized business mindsets or careers, and maybe you want to be an entrepreneur or maybe you want to work for somebody else, but you're not quite sure, if you can just be in the general base of what you want to do, it's okay. I think there's like pressure, pressure, pressure. And sometimes that causes just paralysis.
Totally. Or feeling like you have much momentum in one direction that you just have to stick it. And there in
Yes.
some ways it's like, no, like if you're your why is connected to an end goal, like, you're going to hit resistance, and yes, you should keep pushing to iterate and get to what you want. But if it's, "Oh, no," like, in my heart, I know this is not right for me, like, I'm just not feeling it, and but this feeling like, "But I went to school for this thing," or, like, "My parents want me to be this," or, like, I don't know,
Yeah.
whatever definition is kinda keeping you on one track, that it's like one thing we work on in our coaching is, like, it's good to have those future goals, the 5, 10. We have, there are people that, teenagers that are like, "20 years from now, I'm gonna own my investment firm and do this," and it's so cool and fun, but, um, one thing we try
That's
to do.
awesome. I'm like, I don't even know what I'm doing in 20 years.
Right? But just to, like, distill the why, like, okay, you're interested in journalism. Why? And what I could see from the moment I step into one of your stores is that your approach to, training your shop girls incorporates an element of journalism to it. Like, you walk in and someone greets you, meets you with eye contact, asks, "How's your day going? Can I help you look for anything today?" Like, "Oh, you're looking for jeans. Like, what kind of jeans? Like, where will you be wearing them?" Like, there's a natural, it's not like interrogation, but there's a journalism-y kind of element to what you've, like, instilled into your business, probably without even realizing it, right? There's probably your interest in journalism was probably tied to just curiosity about people, or trying to kind of, like,
I
share
think it's
someone's
the
story or
connection.
connect. Yeah, that there's
I think
something
it's the
there, right?
connection aspect. Mhm, and so suddenly realizing, like, shoving a microphone in someone's face isn't how I wanted to connect with them, but that I couldn't even tell you that at 25, I was that far down the road.
Yeah.
The thing is we get where we're going by starting.
Yep.
So that's where I love to talk about just creating change and things not having to be perfect, because I see so many people not make a choice because it's not perfect or because they're not sure that where they're, doing this today is going to take them where they want to be in that 10 and 20-year time frame. I mean, it's like that's why I think we just have to be okay and open to opportunity that's going to arise. And yeah, that's why I say I love a pivot, because you can't know what's around that corner. You weren't there yet. So as you're on the journey, to your point, you hate to stick the journey so much that you miss this opportunity, because a lot of times the turn, it's not, if you just change the wording, it's not a pivot, it's an opportunity. And
Totally.
you can't just keep going this way and miss it. Maybe you scoop it up and bring it with you. And I'll tell you, when I was starting a boutique, my mindset was teeny, teeny, tiny. And I said, because my mom worked so hard and so much, she wanted to be a mom and have 5 children, and her life path took her down a different road where I was her only biological child. She became a CFO of a company. She worked 8 zillion hours. She was a powerhouse. And as much as I respected her, I saw how that was hard for her. So I said, I'm going to own a little boutique, and then I can work there part time and be a mom part time. And that's what it will be. And what happened is, the more I got into it, the more I loved it. The more I loved the wins, the more I loved the connections, the more I loved creating opportunity for other women more than just myself and my own family. And so, had I said, this is what I said I'm going to do, and if I do that, I have to work more. If I do that, I'll have more responsibility, or whatever the case may be, then Shop Common Thread wouldn't even be Shop Common Thread today, right? So it's just, you set your goal, and I hope everyone gets there, and I hope I get to my end game. But now I'm at a point in my life that I realize I don't have to know that how I'm going to get there anymore. And there's probably going to be a lot along the way that changes. And maybe the dream is going to be even bigger than we ever could have imagined right now.
Totally. I think that's such good advice to kinda just, like, set your aim, but then you gotta, like, shoot your arrow and, like, let it go, like, let it fly, let things come to you, and, approach them and pivot when you need to, but just be present as you're on your journey. You mentioned that, so you got an SBA loan, your mom co-signed with you. Tell us a little bit about that, like, in the vein of us saying, "Go ahead, just start and do and try." When you pulled the trigger on starting your boutique, can you take us into that mindset a little bit?
Clueless, Asha. Clueless. Okay, so I applied for 2 SBA loans
Uh-huh.
with Bank of the West and Wells Fargo. And I just kept going. I mean, I think I was a manifester before manifesting was a thing. I didn't wait for them to tell me if I was getting the loan. I set up market appointments. I was meeting with a leasing agent. I picked my space. So I go to LA Market one day, and I'm not sure you've ever been there, but it's a parking garage. Well, thank God, because as I was pulling into that parking garage, I was receiving a voicemail from Bank of the West letting me know that unfortunately she couldn't get the loan approved. She was so bummed it was declined. She pushed it back to underwriting a second time. They brought it back. It's a no. I went through my whole day. I was placing orders, this, that. I'm on my drive home. I don't even know I have a voicemail. Wells Fargo calls. I've got the loan. And that morning, the other bank told me no. I was clueless. I was going on like it was just going to happen. I can't even tell you what I would have done had I not gotten the loan. I just never thought about it. And I can tell you now I have to work for that mindset. I loved the days where it came naturally, but that was also, I wasn't married. I didn't have a mortgage. I didn't have children. Life's responsibilities come at us. And sometimes we lose that just blissful nature of like, that's going to work. Why wouldn't it work? I still think I have a lot of that, but it takes a little bit more work. So clueless. I went to market and there was this woman named Kathy who taught me how to place orders, how far ahead you're placing orders, how you're going to get the inventory. I mean, I literally learned as I went. And it meant that I grew a lot slower, I think, than a lot of businesses grow. I mean, that first decade was more learning than growing. It was like baby, 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 baby growth. But I was young and it worked. Um, do we wish it went faster? It's hard to wish for things to go differently than how they went, but I do sometimes go, "Wow, I've been at this a long time," It really took a long time for that change to happen.
So your first boutique, was it expecting?
It was.
Okay.
It was. So there's another thing I was clueless about because if I could give anybody a piece of advice, anytime you start a business, remember you don't know about the twists and turns and where you're going to go. And when you name yourself expecting, there's really only one thing you can be, and that's a maternity business. And we started as a maternity boutique. It was 2006. There were so many successful boutiques.
Mm.
I got this idea. It was a business idea, obviously not a personal need. And I pigeonholed myself with this name.
Well, it's interesting because I wouldn't have even thought that kind of reading through your story, but I get it. I feel like that, when you see a landscape where it's like there's so many boutiques, there probably was almost like a pressure to like find your niche, and do something specific and like, oh, well, I'm just gonna, pick the kind of this one thing and nail it, but also having
Yep.
to kind of think small and then think big again, where it's like, okay, well, does this kind of give me an opportunity to branch out or change later? I mean,
It
that's
was
so
just not a question that I
interesting.
asked, and the crazy part is when I went to rebrand a decade in, well, first of all, everyone says you can't, you can't, you can't, you can't, and sometimes you just can't listen to people,
Yep,
sometimes you just know, and I was testing out names and people kept saying to me, "But that doesn't tell me who you are," and I'm like, "No, no, that's the point." I'm not going to say I sell women's clothing in a word,
yeah,
right? So, you just trust yourself. Like, that's my other piece of advice is, like, young girls, young women, I think they know a lot, and the world maybe takes for granted their experience and their knowledge, right? You're 16, you're 17, you're young. I don't think that always matters. I don't think it always matters. I think you know yourself, you know your environment, you know a lot more than maybe the world is gonna admit to you.
totally. I think that there's so much truth to that. I mean, men have intuition too, but it looks a little different. I think really
Mhm.
young women, like we are born with intuition, and I think a lot of that is that are we're sensitive and not saying like, oh, we cry a lot, but like we're sensitive. We take things in. I think that as women, we, perceive and observe and absorb our surroundings. I'm of the opinion more than men, and with all of our senses, and awareness in our bodies. And I think that we store that information and wisdom really even at, a young age. I see it in my daughters. She's like older daughter,
I was gonna
three and
say,
a half, and she'll
yeah.
say things sometimes. I'm like, oh, like she was paying attention, like really paying attention. She noticed that detail or made this connection, and it's so beautiful. So I think that that's such a good piece of advice to a young woman, that don't discount your wisdom before someone else does, and even if they do, screw them.
Mhm.
sometimes, like, there's something
Sometimes
there.
you stop asking.
Yeah,
Yeah, sometimes when I mean, I will tell you when I finally decided to rebrand, I didn't tell anybody
yeah,
because for a year I'd been saying, "I think our name's a problem. I think our name's a problem." And people would say, "But it's been a decade.
yeah.
It's been a decade. Keep the name, market it differently." And so it's like I was creating this mountain to
Mhm.
climb forever. Can you imagine if it was still expecting you're climbing that mountain forever
Yeah,
versus rebrand today?
yeah,
And you might have a little dip, a little hill to get over where people go, "I've never heard of you. Are you new?" They don't realize you've been around for a decade. But then, now that was 8 years ago. People hardly remember. They don't care
yes.
if it's the same owner, not the same owner. It doesn't so I'm so grateful that I did trust my intuition and make that change, and I do wish that, I had that little nugget of advice, so I tell everybody. Everybody who's gonna start a business, be
Yes.
careful what you name it.
Such a good piece of advice. It's funny because originally we were Bridget Foundation first, because I was a 501(c)(3) earlier, and that's a whole other story of.
Where did Bridget come from? I'd never heard
Yeah,
that.
so it's so funny because I would go and do these events and stuff, and they're like, "Are you Bridget?" I'm like, "No, I'm Asha." They're like, "Which one's Bridget?" And I'm like, "Well, it's we're all a Bridget." I was really obsessed in college. I loved watching TED Talks. I think part of me,
Uh-huh.
I always aspired. I loved, like, Barbara Walters. I liked people that, like, interviewed other people. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
But I liked watching the TED Talks because I'm like, I was so fascinated with, like, these people sharing their ideas. And I thought, as a company, that's so cool, and I liked that Ted kind of felt like a person you would go to satisfy this intellectual curiosity. So I was like, "Well, what would be, like, the girl version of Ted?" And I remember I woke up one morning and I was like, "Bridget," like, it has the word bridge in it, and I liked the idea of these sort of, like, horizontal connections. Like, this isn't mentorship, we're not, like,
Mhm.
pairing you with a mentor who's, like, looking down on you. All ages, all stages, we have something to learn from each other. So, I'm, like, a person that ascribes meaning to, like, every little toothpick in my life, but that's kinda where it came from. But originally, yeah, it was Bridget Foundation, and then I shut down the nonprofit because we were kinda interacting with a lot of big companies, and when you're a nonprofit, even though, like, the work that we do now absolutely falls into what could be tax-free, there's just all these different subtle things that we had to realize later, and in my heart, I was like, like, I don't know, like, maybe people would think of us a little bit differently if we were a for-profit company." And eventually
Mhm.
just had to just do it, and really it was during the pandemic that brought that to mind, and I was like, "Let's just backtrack, let's set it up differently, we can shut it down, set it up
There's
again."
another pivot.
Yeah,
Another pivot for
it's
you.
it's hard, and it's kinda like that pill you have to swallow, but now I'm like, the fundamental, like, the heart behind our brand has always been sort of the same. But getting it to the right thing also feels so good when you're able to kinda look back and be like, "Oh, yeah, like, I'm glad we kinda shifted these things and did these things."
Yeah.
I'd love to hear about, so the name Shop Common Thread. How did you
Mhm.
get to that? Your logo is this sweet, like, heart that looks like,
With the
yeah,
threads,
like a
right?
thread that, like, those little pin things that we used to make. I wish I this is a audio thing, but go look at her website and you'll see the logo. Tell us a little bit about your
It's
inspiration behind the name.
yeah, it is a heart with, like, all these threads in it. So, we did hire a marketing company, and we bounced around all these names, and all my employees were helping. I mean, I had, like, 5 or 6 women working for me at the time because our growth really did begin after the rebrand. And one of the women who worked for me at the time, and she's still a friend and works super part-time, she's a mom, she brought up Common Thread, and we loved it instantly because thread kind of relates to clothing, and that is what we sell, but it's also like that community connection, a common link and a common thread to each other. So it's why I loved your description with the bridge is same thing. It relates to the clothing that we sell, but it also relates to our connection. And so we became Shop Common Thread.
I love it. If you were to, I mean, you've navigated pivots, you're building, I mean, you've opened another location. Can you tell us a little bit about, so that was like an early big pivot. Are there other, hiccups or obstacles, things that you really just had to move through as you've been navigating your business up to this day?
Every day, every week, every year. So here's what I can tell you. When things were, well, 2020, we thought would be this huge obstacle, then it turned into this huge opportunity. But everything brings a huge challenge. Right now, we're selling things so fast and we have supply chain issues. Well, I had never dealt with supply chain issues before. We shut down and became a warehouse. So, our ecom business, that was the gift. We have all this ecom business. Then we got to open back up. Now we needed a warehouse. We have an ecom business now. We didn't really have one before. So, it's like a blessing and a new challenge. Then we decided we finally had our footprint right. I mean, I didn't even tell you about how we went under construction to double our size and opened January 16th, 2020. So we had exactly 2 fabulous months of
Yeah.
going from 1,400 to 2,700 square feet, and then
Wow.
we had to shut everything down. So it was like high, low, right? You're like, "Yes, we're double the size. Oh my gosh, they're shutting us down. Wait, people are still shopping. This is amazing. We'll be like a warehouse. Oh wait, now we're open for business. We have nowhere to put this." It's just constant.
Yeah.
Then we were growing fast. I needed a culture. I realized we had just been little. It was like myself and the girls in the store. So we had this unwritten, unspoken culture, but now I needed to step away. So we needed a real deal culture and even have systems. And we just started growing so fast and we're winging it. And suddenly women are like, we need to know what to do when you're not here. There needs to be one way to do everything. So we had to create this book of systems that still amazes me that my ops manager wrote it. And then things were going amazing until we signed a lease to open a new space summer of 2023. All new construction. It's still not open. We're hoping for summer of 2024. So we had to find somewhere to put all that inventory. So we got a temp space. I mean, my list could go on and on and on. And the reason I share it is because, exactly to your point, from the outside, I think somebody could say, "Oh, that's so cool. They're opening a space in San Juan Capistrano. And then they decided to open in Fashion Island." No, we didn't decide to open in Fashion Island. That was like, we have inventory. We must create a solution. So when you're on the outside
Mhm.
and something seems really glamorous and really awesome and really successful, just remember they might be going through it. So don't compare your story to theirs because you're probably doing awesome.
I think there's also, I mean, young people, older people, we all hear like, do what you love, find the thing that you love and make it your job. But I think that that can't be conflated with do what you like and what's easy all the time. Because
Oh, it's
that
not.
would be impossible to find. You can find a job where the hard things come up. If you're doing something important, hard things will come up. But if you are committed to the mission enough, if it's tied to who you are as a person and your values, you'll find ways to work through them. You'll be able to face those things as they come up. If you're not tied to it, that friction will probably be a little bit more miserable, But, I would caution someone to try to just pursue to find something that just will feel glamorous or easy all the time. And then when they try something that they think might be glamorous and then they find that it's not. I think that those could be signs where it's like, okay, dig deeper. Like, what is your value? What is the value you want out of work and your life and your lifestyle? And then kind of like navigate from that place rather than just seeing like, oh my gosh, that looks like a really cool job. Like listen to one of
Mhm.
these episodes, get the nitty gritty. Like, why did this person stick to this thing? What is it about them that makes them successful there? And then be ready to face the obstacles because really they're hard when you're going through them. But I bet, you look at your culture, which came out of necessity. You look at your warehouses, you look at your, rabid clientele that like they felt you stick with them throughout the pandemic when it was like, all right, like now we're at home in our sweats. Like, you know, you were there. You're like, okay, like you can order and pick it up by the boutique, and we're gonna give you cute sweats to be in, like, you should still take care of yourself. Here's an outfit you can put together that you can teach your kids Zoom school in and still feel good about yourself. I'm sure you look back at those, sticky moments that were tough with a lot of pride now?
Well, and you keep them with you because it's not like, "Oh, I got through that. Phew, I'm done."
Yes.
And that is the thing about entrepreneurship that I feel like we need to just be honest with young people who are thinking about becoming entrepreneurs because it is a different trade-off, right? You get to work for yourself. You're not answering to people. You really get to create the culture and the vibe and the brand that you want, but that doesn't come without different challenges and pressures. And they're the real deal, you know? And you will, like you said, you have to have that why. I mean, we know that we want to show up and connect with the community and help women feel a certain way. So even during times that we're maybe not selling as much, we go, okay, well, did one woman walk in and feel better? Okay, just go home with that today. You know, you didn't go home with amazing sales days or, you know, the goal that you set for yourself. But so sometimes, to your point, it has to just be tied to something else
Yeah.
because that's what keeps you going. And basic advice, if you do start something, I feel like if you wanna still be around a decade from now, the most simple thing is to not have a plan B. I mean, that's the simple advice because I have my why and I have my deep meaning, and there are still weeks, moments, days where I'm, like, on my knees going, "What did I do, God?" And, like, "Why is this so hard?" And I'm showing up, and there's moments where I'm like, "I don't wanna do this. I just don't wanna do this." Every day feels so hard. But I don't really I set myself up in a situation where I can't get out of it right away, and that's the best thing because you do get through those hard times and you're like, "I'm so glad I do this.
Yeah.
I'm so glad I learned that lesson and that I overcame and that I met this person." And so you'll ride the highs and lows, but the one thing I know is you ride them whether you're working inside a company for somebody else. You know, I have so many awesome friends and women who work for me now who were so selfless and they gave up careers to be home with their family. And that came with its own set of challenges that they navigated. And so we like to look at what somebody has or doesn't have that's different than ours and think that they have it easier. And what I've learned from hearing people's stories is we're all going to go through it at some point, but we're also going to get through it and enjoy those just like incredible feelings on the other side.
I love it. We always reach out to our potential guests and have them kind of fill out some questions we asked to get all of our juices flowing for an interview. And you wrote something so beautiful that I just, if you don't mind, I'd love to just read it verbatim because it
I
really,
don't even remember.
you did.
So great.
I shared it with Kashia too, and she was like, boom. So she started her little questionnaire with this. We've all heard the sayings, the joys in the journey, have a growth mindset, or even the simple yet profound, create your own destiny. Honestly, those sound like amazing, albeit lofty ambition. And when life is going well, it isn't too difficult to repeat these mantras and move through our days with positivity. The real question is, how do we develop a mindset that allows us to create momentum and continue to stack wins when it feels like we just might lose? How do we create a never quit attitude and move forward amidst adversity? And I thought that was so powerful because that pursuit and that question, I think, is such a mark of a leader to be thinking, like, okay, like, how do we stack those wins? And I think what you've mentioned too is like a big part of that is recognizing the wins, and maybe the win
Mhm.
one day is having one woman find one dress that just helps her feel good on vacation, or maybe it's something as big as like a huge breakthrough or a product that, surprises you. Um, but I loved that, what you wrote. So
Thank you. And we do have to recognize those wins. I wasn't always great at that. And we have to. We have to celebrate wins for ourselves and for others around us. You know, I love to celebrate the women around me. That brings me, I mean, that is one of my whys. And it brings me so much joy. And that's why I keep going because it's not just about, you know, my little tiny circle or family anymore. It's about these women, like I let them in and they let me in and they trusted me. Right. And so it's huge. It's
yes.
huge for me. It keeps me going.
Well, I have loved this conversation. I'm going to do our little fast five. We like to end with a fast five and then one question we always close out with. But you're just so great. And I feel like I could chat with you all day. I'm going to
Thank
jump
you.
right in. So, number one, do you have a morning routine?
Yes. It's like psychotic. I can run through it really fast, but I always tell people I got here one thing at a time. I like to wake up really early and I have my coffee. I like to journal, pray, meditate, read, work out, and cold plunge before anybody's awake.
I love it.
It's a lot. It's a lot. But I'm not a night owl. That is what I always tell people. And I do think that moms especially need a little bit of quiet time and you get it on one end or the other. And I know you and Kashia were talking about that. You were morning, she was night, right? And I heard you guys kind of acknowledging that same theory.
Yes. I love it. I'm a big well, when I can. I'm like sometimes I'm like, "Oh, I'm gonna do all these things that I wake up," and then it's like, "I'm gonna get up at 5," and then, like, my 3-year-old wakes up at 4:30. But I
Yeah.
love
See, mine are older. Mine are older.
like,
So I'm like
I'm
at a
getting back to it
consistent,
soon.
you'll get there one day.
Yes. Number 2, what is your most worn or your favorite outfit?
A jumpsuit. Always a denim jumpsuit. Each season I need a new one.
Love it. Number 3, what was your scariest entrepreneurial moment?
Oh, March 13th, 2020. I honestly thought when everything got shut down, I could not wrap my mind around how that was going to work. And like that first 48 hours, I think was like total shock.
But she got through it. Love it.
Mhm.
Number 4, what are your non-negotiables? What does that mean to you?
Ugh. My morning routine, that alone time and working out are non negotiable to set my day. Absolutely. And then just part of my values, I need a little time with my family and a little time for my faith every day.
Beautiful. Number 5, what's next for Shop Common Thread?
Oh, God willing, San Juan Capistrano. We're going South County. And I just feel such a tie to South Orange County. It's like I never thought I could feel a connection to a community the way I do to this East Side Costa Mesa kind of Newport Beach, because the way that people just embraced us here, but so many women from so many different South Orange County little cities and pockets have shopped with us and been waiting and like are asking and supporting. And I just like my gut tells me that even though this is the hardest thing we'll go through, what's coming on the other end is going to blow our minds.
I love it. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing it open with a bang, and I admire just your intuition guiding you there and really listening too to your client base, which is such a huge part of being an entrepreneur too, right? Where it's like create the thing, but you have to listen to like, okay, who are the people on the other end?
Mhm.
So I
100%.
love it. Where can people find you online, your website? Where can they shop with you?
So the website is Shop Common Thread. So if you're not local, if you are local, it's a great way to just get a piece of our vibe, but also on Instagram, which is Shop Common Thread OC. We have a blast on there. We are like the try on queens.
Yes.
And then I'm at
Yes.
Shop Girl Steph, where I just like to talk about random inspiration and motivation on my personal Instagram.
Highly recommend both. Literally the try-ons all through the pandemic. I think you guys were doing them in the pandemic too, but it's one of my
Yeah.
favorite things to go on the Shop Common Thread Instagram and just, like, let the stories of the try-ons play while I'm, like, doing my makeup or whatever, and I'm like, "Ooh, oh," like, it's even if I'm not shopping that week, "Oh,
Yeah.
I have a little jumpsuit like that," or like, "Oh, I should wear those hats more often." Just a fun community, and all the girls are so sweet.
And that's the
Love it.
idea. Like a lot of times we're just giving you ideas of how to use what you already have. Other times clients come in with those screenshots, because we're busy women and we don't have time to like explore everything. They're like, I want this, I want this, I want this. And,
Yes. So good.
uh, you know, suddenly people feel like they know us. And I love that because it's like, cool, you know everything about me now. And all I have to hear about is you. And we're just like, fast friends.
Perfect. Well, for our final question, we always ask the same one. What was one quality that you had as a young woman that maybe you didn't appreciate then, but you love so much now?
That achiever in me, that type A organized ability to just take the lead and get stuff done. I heard that it was bossy, boring, predictable, and now I feel like I flipped it, and it's what helps me be a great leader today.
Well, Steph, this is such a treat. I so appreciate your time and your story and your vulnerability, and can't wait for this to impact so many people. So, thank you.
Thanks for doing all the good work you're doing for young women. I just love it.
Thank you.